G'day, I'm Pete. I'm the Aussie Bush Cop. In 2012 I retired from the New South Wales Police for mental health reasons, and now I get to live on this beautiful King Island where I'm a homesteader, and I'd love to share some of my stories with you. You might have seen the movie The Sixth Sense and got a little kid who says, "I see dead people." Well, come in the shack and I'll tell you a few stories about dead people. G'day everybody, thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to talk to you about death. Not a very pleasant subject, but it happens to all of us. I'm going to share with you a whole bunch of things that I've dealt with, and I'm going to start with the more sedate ones and work through to the more problematic ones. When somebody dies, there is a process, and generally speaking, the vast majority of the time, a doctor will sign a death certificate. And that means that that's the end of the matter. There's no further investigation. We know why the person died. But sometimes there's no death certificate issued by a doctor, and there's a postmortem. And so in this first story, I was called to an elderly man's home because his son could not raise him by phone. And so he rang the police and said, "I have a concern for his welfare." So we went round to his home. We had a bit of a look on the computer first, and we noticed that I think it was only a matter of months, maybe a short number of months before his wife had died. And of course, that's not normal. Normally, men die first, and then the husband, and then the wife dies later. This wasn't one of those cases. So we went round to his home, a lovely, modest home in this town, and we couldn't raise anyone by knocking on the door. The neighbours hadn't seen him, so then we made the decision to forcibly enter the home. And we found the gentleman, quite an elderly man, deceased on his bed. There was nothing suspicious, and so we did what we had to do. But his son came up to this particular town. The son lived in Sydney, and he brought with him a really expensive bottle of whiskey to give to me, and I would have been impolite to say to him, "Sorry mate, I can't accept that." So I accepted it in good grace, but then I had to do a report, and and it's not appropriate for me to keep it, so I don't know what happened to the bottle of whiskey, but that's what happened. The second one was about an older lady who passed on. Now what happens was that this one was going to go to a postmortem, and so there's got to be a continuous chain of identification, which means that that's maybe a next of kin says to me, "Well, this is Mary Smith," and then when I go to the postmortem, I tell the pathologist who's going to conduct the postmortem, "This is Mary Smith." And so what happened is that I'd been to her home where she died, and then I went maybe the next day or a number of days later, went to the morgue where the postmortem was going to be held. And of course the first thing is that I have to identify the body to the pathologist. And I'll admit that after the body had been in the cool room for at least a day, she looked a fair bit younger because being at, I don't know what temperature the bodies are stored at, but it takes some of the wrinkles out. And I tell you, there was a split second there and I thought, gee, I don't know if that's her or not. But anyway, it was, and the postmortem was done. Another one that happened at a local hospital, at a big hospital, was that I was called up there to assist with the identification of a young man's body. What had happened was that this young man was a farmer, and I don't know where this happened at, but it was some distance away, and he was doing some farm work, and he was run over by his own tractor. What happened was that he was loading round bales of hay onto a trailer behind the tractor, and when he was doing it, he probably accidentally bumped the trailer, which set the tractor and trailer in motion. He then jumped off the tractor that he was driving, that was lifting the round bales, to get into the tractor and he slipped in the slippery hay. As you might know, hay is very slippery. And he slipped over, and the rear wheel of the tractor went over his body. You might be wondering, well, how do you know that? We know that because he survived long enough to tell people what had happened. And he was within eyeshot, maybe hundreds of metres away, but he was within eyeshot of the farmhouse. And someone in the farmhouse could see something that didn't seem right, and they went over and they found him, and he survived. They then got they called a road ambulance. Air ambulance then came, flew him to the hospital where they were hoping to conduct emergency surgery on him to save his life. But anyway, he survived and he told them what had happened. But unfortunately, he died on the operating table. My job was to go to the hospital and get someone to, or even though we all know who he was, it's got to be a positive identification. So I went up to the hospital, and by then quite a number of his next of kin and friends had gathered at the hospital, and they were in, like say, a public waiting area. And I spoke to the nurse and I said, look, of all these people here, who do you think is the one best suited, psychologically speaking, to tell me who he is? So she pointed at this particular lady and she said, I think it's her. So I approached her very diplomatically and said, listen, I need you to tell me who he is. And so we went in, and he was still, had all the gear. Part of what happens when there's a post-mortem, the body's not touched. Everything that was, say, cannulas in the arm, whatever it is, tourniquets, whatever it is, the body is left in situ. Anyway, and so the body was identified to me. And the doctor, who was, I think, maybe midway through performing this surgery, it was on his heart. And he said to me, mate, this bloke would have died if he got here straight away. Part of his heart just popped off. Just, I don't know what the technical word is, but there's no way in the world he was going to survive. I said before about how there's sort of two paths. If a doctor signs a death certificate, then that's the end of the matter. If a doctor doesn't sign a certificate, then it becomes officially called a coroner's matter, where the first port of call is always a post-mortem. But there's one time in my career, and I don't know why, but a doctor signed a death certificate, but the coroner said, no, I'm not going to accept that. And there was a post-mortem anyway. So it's not always cut and dry, although it is very rare. Another deceased matter that became a coroner's matter, I went to the post-mortem to assist and to view it. And there's an interesting connection at that point between the medical profession and the policing one. And part of your job is to brief the pathologist as much as you can about this person. And what I had been told by probably next of kin or friends, that the deceased was an alcoholic. And so I'm there watching. The pathologist has, you might just say, his labourer who does most of the work. And, it might be like tools that you normally have in your workshop, bolt cutters and the like. Anyway, so the other bit of information that I was able to give the pathologist is that the man, the deceased, told his family and friends that he had cancer, undiagnosed cancer, but he believed that he had cancer. And so during the post-mortem, the pathologist said to me, he said, look at that, Peter. He said he did have cancer. It's not what killed him, but he did have cancer on one of his organs. And he also commented that for an alcoholic, his liver, and I must admit, to me, it's an untrained eye, of course, but his liver looked in really good condition. And it's funny, once you get beyond the wrinkles of the outside, bodies look almost like they're brand new. Anyway, but he had undiagnosed, he did have cancer, and he had a pretty good liver. I can't remember what he died from. Probably most of the time it's just the heart starts to fail, and then the heart, because then the lungs sorry, no, it starts the other way. The lungs start to fail and they get water in them. They build up with moisture. That puts extra pressure on the heart and the heart fails. I don't know if that was this post-mortem or not, but I've been to a post-mortem where the pathologist held up the lungs, and like you might do with a sponge when you're washing your car or your dishes, he squeezed it and all this water just ran out of the lungs. There was such a build-up of moisture in these lungs. So then another story for you was that one day we took a body. I can't remember what happened with this body, but we took the body to the hospital, and doesn't matter how obviously dead somebody is, you need, part of the paperwork that we need to do is called a death pronounced deceased certificate, death extinct certificate. And so we're just very used to that. So we watching the doctor, was in a hallway, I think it might have been in the hospital, and the doctor stood at the feet of the body and looking towards the head, and she just said, "He's dead, he's dead." And which I, must admit, I thought I'd probably do a better job than that. Anyway, when we left the hospital, I said to my partner, "Look, if anything ever happens to me and I end up here," I said, "I don't want her pronouncing me dead, because I don't want to wake up and go, little bit of a small room here, can someone open the door?" Anyway, I wasn't very impressed with that. Another deceased I went to was quite an elderly man. He was a farmer, and he was driving his farm ute, and he was driving home. Interestingly enough, he'd been in to see the doctor for, I don't know what for, but he'd been in there to see the doctor, and he's on his way home. His home was quite some distance, maybe more than 100 kilometres from the town where he just visited and seen the doctor. What happened was that another farmer was working on their farm, and they saw this utility on the side of the road, and they noticed there was someone in it. And they were busy doing work on their tractor work, and after a while they got curious enough and went over there to see why this man was still in his ute. And they discovered that, well, he was dead. But they weren't sure, of course, and so they did the right thing and rang the ambulance. The ambulance came and quickly said, "No, this person's dead." So then they called us. It then becomes a police matter. So we went out there, and as soon as we got there, the Ambos were pretty keen to get out of there because they had to get back to town in case they were needed. But I noticed that next to the body was still mostly sitting upright in the seat, and but next to him was a wallet, and the wallet was chock-a-block full of money. I mean notes. And I said to the Ambos, "Hang on, before you go anywhere, we're going to take that money and we're going to count it, and you're going to sign my notebook to say how much money was there, because money discrepancies and other things can get you into a lot of trouble in the coppers." So anyway, we did that, and I made the joke, because he had money in his wallet. If you're not from Australia, we went from having paper money to polymer notes quite some time ago. But this man had paper notes in his wallet, and I just made the joke. I said, "This bloke has got to be a bachelor, because a married man doesn't have that much folded money in his wallet." And turned out I was right. So we counted for the money, counted it. One of the Ambos countersigned my notebook, and he was, I can't remember if it went to a post-mortem or not. I don't think so. I remember going into the doctor where he had been, and discreetly or said, "Listen, doc, bloke was in here a couple of hours ago, he's dead." I can't remember really if it went to become a post-mortem or not. But anyway, he, I don't know why he went to the doctor, but the doctor didn't pick up on the fact that he was about to he had a heart attack, I believe. Another one that I went to, of course, most when someone dies, often the first person or the first agency that's called is the Ambos. So this happened on this particular night, I think it was, in a residential area of a town. Got there and I walked in through the front door, and I walked into where I could see other people, and there was Ambos in there, and there was what appeared initially to be a person laying on the floor, an adult female laying on the floor, and she was laying on her back, but one of her arms was sort of at a bent aspect, and the back of the hand was well and truly off the floor. And I said to the Ambos, I actually just had my head stuck around the corner, and the body was laying in the kitchen. And I said to one of the Ambos, "What's wrong with her?" And they said, "She's dead." But what had happened was she died sufficiently earlier, and the body contracts, and the muscle in her arm just simply contracted, and so her arm was at an angle, and the back of the hand was off the floor. But then there was a bit of an issue around something around the body. I won't say what it was, but was suggestive of a possible murder. And for that reason, of course, we couldn't let other people in. And there were other people outside who desperately wanted to come in. And I had to say, no, you can't. And they became even more insistent, especially one person, that they were going to come in. I had to threaten them with being arrested, because at that point, we're looking at a possible murder. And of course, you cannot have a scene like that contaminated by other people. Anyway, the detectives came, and after a period of time, they were satisfied that it was of natural causes. One of the other things that happens in the police, of course, is you're going to meet or you're going to see a body before too long. And what happens with probationary constables, they get sworn in generally on a Friday, and then they do their first shift at their new police station on the Monday morning. And I don't know how long, and probationary constables work with a field training officer, initially for the first, might be a couple of months or something like that. And I was one of those field training officers. So this particular day was day work, and someone had ended their life by gassing themselves with carbon monoxide gas in a car, and it was in the summer. And the sergeant who was in charge of that shift said to me, I was working with this probationary constable, and he just said to me, "Pete," said, "take her out and show her a dead 'un," meaning a dead one. "Okay, Sarge." So we went out, and I took this probationary constable with me to show her a dead 'un. We got out there, and the crime scene unit police were there, and they gave us a piece of the piece of garden hose that this person had run from the exhaust pipe into the cabin of the car. And they wanted us to take it back to the police station as an exhibit, because every suicide, until proven otherwise, is presumed to be a murder. That's why I use the word exhibit. But the piece of garden hose, and now the stench that comes from a body that's been in a car for a number of days is just, I don't know what adjective to describe it. It is filthy. It is just an offensive, deeply offensive stench. And so the crime scene detective gave us this piece of garden hose. Now we were working out of a caged truck, and I put the piece of garden hose in the cage, and we drove back to the police station to enter it up as an exhibit. I can tell you, when we got back there, the back of the truck stunk. And the piece of garden hose was a brand new piece of garden hose. I think the deceased must have just went to the hardware shop expressly to buy a garden hose to do the job. It was brand new. And garden hose is pretty smooth. You think, what's going to attach itself to that? But the back of the truck just was rank with the same stench. Unbelievable. Another one that I went to similar method of dying was a fellow who was before the court on child sex offences. And this fellow decided to end his life within the confines of the city CBD, Central Business District. And I can tell you there was no police there that attended and thought they had any sympathy for him. So the next one that we went to was in the New South Wales coppers. There's 3 different levels of licence within the New South Wales Police. There's bronze, silver and gold. To conduct urgent duty, which means drive with lights and sirens going and go through red lights and stop lights and all that sort of stuff, you need a silver certification. Now, the vast majority of police have silver certification, but the very first time that I ever used my silver certification to do an urgent duty was one day in this particular town, and someone had ended their life with a firearm in a residential home. And it always kind of darkly fascinates me when people do this, how they know that the person who's going to find them is most likely their next of kin. And that's what happened. This man, I don't know why, he was certainly elderly. His wife was in the habit of preparing him porridge for breakfast in the morning. She went and prepared his breakfast, and then she went, I think, into his bedroom to tell him his breakfast was ready, but he wasn't there in the bedroom, and then she found him out in the yard, fatally wounded through the head. And that's just pretty tough. You know, it's easy for us, I suppose, but it's pretty tough for the next of kin to find that. Another one was actually a fatal motor vehicle accident, and it was a single vehicle accident, and it happened on a really gravelly road. And there was what we call in Australia people mover, which is a van with lots of seats, maybe 8, 10 people, I'm not sure, could be in one of these vehicles, and sadly the vehicle just rolled. The driver lost control and the car rolled. And there were some pretty seriously injured people. I remember one fellow had a huge chunk of flesh missing from his shoulder. He just he came out of the car, hit the road, it was just horrible. But there was a lady, might say an elderly lady, who was inside the car and was clearly dead. But we're of course dealing with the surviving and the injured, and there was a young girl there, and she was very distressed about her relative, the one that was dead, inside the car, and I just presumed she knew, but I had to say to her, listen, I'm sorry, darling, but she's dead. And it was only when it seemed to me she needed someone in authority to tell her that. I think she knew it already, but she needed someone just to tell her. Another fatal that I went to was a young man who was a farm, what we call in Australia a farm boy, and he was, him and some of his friends were having a big party down on a river, not far from where the farmhouse was. And during the night, he heard that his mother heard him come home, and the farms, it's not unusual for them to have cool rooms where they might store and hang animals, sheep or cattle. And she heard him come back, and then that's where they kept the beer. And they'd run out of beer, and he came back and got another carton of beer. And then he left. But sadly, on his way back to the party, he collided with a tree, and the car caught fire, and he perished in the fire. And I didn't attend initially, but I was there. They must have posted a guard on the vehicle overnight, and I was there the next day with the crime scene detective, and he was processing the scene in daylight hours. And it got to the point where we had to lift the body, or what was left of the body, out of the cabin of the ute and, take it away. Because it's still, despite that, they can still do a post-mortem on the body. And the body was in a very degraded state from the fire. And when we were lifting the body, a tooth fell from his jaw. Just fell out of his jaw. And the crime scene detective quickly went and got a small thing of super glue and super glued the tooth back into its place. And he saw me giving him a quizzical look. He said, that's just so that we can if we need to do a denture impression. And so even though almost certainly we knew who it was, and they would rely upon DNA from him and DNA from his relative, that's just one of the ways of ID, is a dental impression. And that's why the tooth was super glued back into the jaw. So thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you again next time.